Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar about the upcoming sanitary and phytosanitary rules for agri-food goods entering Britain from the EU that are still scheduled to be introduced from 1st July 2022. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Institute of Export and International Trade. My name is William Barnes-Graham, the Senior Content Editor at the Institute, and I will be your host for this afternoon. But on the next slide, you'll see it is my delight to welcome our speaker today in Rob Booth. Hi Rob, great to have you here again with us today. How are you?
Hi Will, good afternoon. Yeah, very good, thank you, and good to be here with everyone for this update this afternoon.
Great stuff. Rob has done a fair few SBS webinars with us now, so it's as very much, as he says, it's very much an update today. As you can see, he is a customs and trade specialist at the Institute with lots of experience both within and supporting businesses in the international trade space. He's also now a regular on our webinar program, so I think it's pretty fair to say you're in safe hands today. But on the next slide, before we get into the presentation, we're going to run a quick poll to find out a little bit more about you, our audience. So we're here trying to gauge what awareness you have of the upcoming sanitary and phytosanitary changes for EU imports into Britain. While you are answering that poll, just a couple more housekeeping notes from me. Firstly, you can contact me with any comments or questions using the question panel on the control window to the right-hand side of your screen. We hope to get to a number of your questions today during the Q&A, though please note we cannot guarantee we will get to every single question in the allocated time. A quick tip though, if your questions are concise and easy for me to read, I am more likely to read them. Secondly, you will receive access to today's slide pack, as well as a recording of the webinar in a follow-up email we will be sending over the next day or so. So please do try to listen in carefully to today's discussion. And finally, a heads up, we're aiming to do this webinar in 45 minutes as advertised. If you require more information from us, please review our new SBS training course, or indeed our other support services, including our technical helpline on export.org.uk. But I'm going to close the poll now and share the results. So thank you everyone for answering. Always really interesting to hear from you. Over half of you are either very aware or quite aware, quite a lot, 46% of you quite aware, about 40% of you less so though, and 3% not sure. Meanwhile, you've been doing a lot of webinars on this topic. Does that tally with what you've seen so far?
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair reflection and especially consistent with companies I've been speaking to over the last few months. I think the messaging has ramped up a bit, and DEFRA especially are increasing the number of communications they're sending out to traders this week. Especially we've seen quite a few updates. So yeah, I think it's just a case of making sure you're finding sources and registering for those updates as and when they come.
Thanks, Rob. And obviously the IOE will be posting its own updates as well to members and the wider community. But we hope to build a bit more awareness today. And the next slide is over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Will. And thank you everyone for taking part in that early poll. So for today then, we're going to have a quick run through of what we know is coming and the key things to look out for, and also reflect on some of the most recent updates and instructions that have been made available by the authorities on SPS matters. So I think most pertinently though, we're going to have a look at what the new rules are going to be from the 1st of July. So this timeline captures some of the crucial developments over the last year or so, especially in regards to your general customs clearance. Some of you may have benefited from that delay in the completion of a customs declaration for your EU imports. So all those arrivals that came into the UK or into GB before the end of last year could potentially still benefit from those easements, but as we move into the middle of this year, that will come to an end. So since the start of this year, then we've had the requirement for declarations on all imports from EUs from January the 1st, so either pre-lodged or upon arrival, depending on the port where the goods arrive. Checks and controls can then be carried out. The new IT system GVMS went live and is in operation for all those ports that operate on more on a kind of roll and roll off freight basis, so like Dover and Eurotunnel, Holyhead, for example. And for the products that are subject to SPS measures, be it food or feed, products of animal origin, plants and plant products, the first stage of those measures were introduced in January, so the need for a pre-notification via the IPAFFS system. And there is an easement or a continuation of those easements we saw last year, still available for those imports of standard goods from the Republic of Ireland. So for imports into GB since we've left the EU, for some of those that are deemed higher risk, they have been subject to what we would probably recognise as full health controls. So a lot of the animal byproducts that wouldn't be for human consumption, high priority plants, and any products of animal origin which are under safeguard measures. So perhaps there's some concerns about those products entering the UK market, so they're under careful monitoring, and they would be subject to that requirement for a pre-notification via IPAFFS. But as I say, the food products that we're generally familiar with, they have been subject to the IPAFFS requirement since January this year. But for those higher risk products though, since last year, health certificates would need to have accompanied those consignments, and they would have been subject to a form of assessment and potentially physical inspections when those goods arrive as well. And depending on the type of product, some of those inspections may actually take place at an approved destination or approved premises, as opposed to the port of arrival. And just to highlight the difference in the forms that should accompany those goods. Individual export health certificates, dependent on the type of product, but for your plant and plant products, a phytosanitary certificate is quite a general form that's used for those. Before those documents can be raised though by the suppliers or the exporters, there is a role for the certifying officers in that country of origin to check the consignment, ensure that the conditions for import can be met, then they can sign off the certificate, and then that original would accompany those goods into GB. And ultimately, the BCPs play a crucial role in ensuring that the biosecurity of the UK is maintained, but we do have at the moment approved locations outside of those ports where most of the BCPs are based, where those inspections will be taking place. So here's our key timeline for the SPS measures then. So January is highlighted here, the IPAFFS pre-notification requirement for all goods subject to any form of SPS measures. That has been in place since January the 1st. So for most food or goods for human consumption, the data set is limited compared to what we will see from July. And from July, this is when we crucially see the introduction of pretty much all controls for those types of products. So those products listed here, regulated plants and plant products, meat and any meat preparations, those high risk foods or feed not of animal origin, so that includes food contact material, perhaps plastic, kitchenware as an example. All those products would need to be arriving through an authorized point of entry that has a designated border control post with it. So those products will be subject to the requirement of a health certificate to accompany the consignment. That would then be subject to at the least a remote check on those documents, and perhaps they will be instructed to report into the BCP for further checks, including identity and physical inspections. We'll also see the introduction of additional documents for some particular food products. So organic products that carry that status, they will need to be presented with a certificate of inspection. And for some fruit and vegetable products, they will also need to ensure that they are entering the UK market, complying with the marketing standards. There are some general standards, some more specific standards, depending on the product type. But a certificate of conformity may be requested when those goods are due to arrive in GB. So not all of those will be instructed to present that document, but they're likely to be chosen on a more risk-based approach for those particular items. From September, this is when we see some further products of animal origin subject to the requirement of having an export health certificate accompany that load. So this is where dairy products will be subject to that requirement. And then November, all remaining regulated products of animal origin, including composite goods, so a mixture of animal origin and plant components as main ingredients, and any fish products as well. So by November, we should start to see what looks like the full customs and regulatory border since leaving the EU. Okay, so let's just have a further look then at IPAFFS. So this is the system for the pre-notification to inform the authorities this particular consignment of potential concern and risk is due to arrive in GB, and the accompanying certificates that should travel with those goods. So the key thing is for any party responsible for bringing those goods into GB will need to be registered on IPAFFS. There is a consideration for companies whether they register themselves on IPAFFS, or actually this is something that their customs intermediary may actually manage on their behalf. So there is a decision to be made there, but it is open at the moment for traders to register themselves. The data set is fairly minimal. Most of that information is available from your suppliers' invoices. You should have access to that type of information that's needed, but the account will need to be set up. That would all be done through the government gateway account, and then you'll need to ensure that there is at least 2 people, I think would be sensible, to have access to the account so they can then take responsibility for those notifications. So what type of information do we need? As I say, it's fairly basic consignment details, but it's all the information we should be able to find on our supplier's invoice. So commodity code should be in there. You may need to disclose the species names as well in there, reason for import, the place of destination, and then contact information as well. And the port of entry, very important. At the moment, there's a lot of data collection going on to ascertain the volumes and frequency and the types of products moving in into GB via various locations. And once it has been submitted, it will create a unique reference, and this will need to be included on the customs declaration. Now, from the 20th of June, this notification will actually transition to the full Common Health Entry Document format, so the CHED. So we need to be working towards that date. This will mean that the data set will increase to the full CHED format, and this reference again will need to be included on the customs declaration. So it's an important date to look out for. You do have a test environment available for IPAFFS based on that CHED format, so worth having a look at that so you can get familiar with the type of information in addition to what we've listed here. Okay. So for certificates then, what type of products are included? We've got 2 types of health certificate. We have the export health certificates for any animal origin goods, so food products that fall under products of animal origin categories, composite food products, some live animals and fish, depending on whether they're actually ready for human consumption, they could be considered products of animal origin, and also those animal byproducts, which we wouldn't generally be consuming. But there are some exemptions. So very important to have a look at some of the conditions for the composite food products. A lot of focus there on the meat content and any heat treatment that the POAO inside that product is subject to. Samples subject to authorization could also be exempt from the health certificate. Some personal goods where there's no meat content, and where there are some exemptions, alternative commercial documents could be presented instead, which don't need to be certified by those officials. Another thing to consider for those suppliers providing products of animal origin, they will need to be approved to do so, and this works for both imports into GB but also exports to the EU as well. So where those products include any meat products, or if that composite product consists of POAO, which makes up more than half of that product, and dairy products for composites, where it's not shelf stable ambient temperatures, they will need to be supplied from approved establishments, and where the processing of any raw POAO is included in that final composite product, also need that approved status. But if you are supplying a composite food product which is manufactured elsewhere, that premises will not need to be approved, but the supplier of the POA content, they would need to be an approved premises. So there's some careful consideration there around the status of the supplier. This information is listed, and you can find the list of those current establishments which are approved. That information will filter through to the IPAFFS notification. Then there's the other type of certificate. We can see the phytosanitary certificate that's required for regulated and notifiable or regulated products, as the category goes. Now, regulated notifiable will mean that it's covered by the plant health controls, and notifiable, it will need to have an IPAFFS pre-notification. Regulated items will need that phytosanitary certificate with the consignment, but the notification may not actually be required unless it is instructed during the customs clearance process. It wouldn't be a mandatory requirement for those goods that fall under that particular category. For full defined lists of that, the Plant Health Portal is very good for guiding you as a starting point. But in this category, we see plants for planting, fruit and veg, seeds for planting, cut flowers, tubers, including some potatoes, grain, soil, some used agricultural machinery poses some risk as well to biosecurity, so they're included there, and growing mediums as well. But again, there are some exemptions to consider. So where they are deemed to be unregulated, they may fall outside of the scope of the current plant health controls. This could include some fruits like pineapple and passion fruits. Processed and packaged fruit and vegetables ready for retail, and any composite products where they contain processed fruit or vegetables as well. In addition to that, there are some other food groups or measures that we need to consider. So we highlighted the certificate of inspection for organic products, so make sure that you're in touch with your organic control body who manage that accreditation. They will be able to support in providing the necessary forms, as we have an interim manual process for obtaining those certificates of inspection. For any fish that's marine caught, and some shellfish and processed fish products, to ensure that the activity or the end product is as a result of legal and regulated activity, catch certificates would be necessary as well, provided by the authorities of the country where the vessel's flag is based. And then we have high-risk food and feed not of animal origin, so model health certificates also necessary for those.
Great, thanks, Rob. I'm going to interject now and do a quick poll. So we're now just wanting to get a sense of whether you are registered to IPAFFS or not, and the options are yes, no, and there's a not sure for good measure as well. Rob, we've had a load of really good questions come through. Thank you everyone for sending them in. A question we have from Sarah, though, picks up on that last slide. You touched on live bivalve mollusks and also processed mussels. A bit of a mouthful for me there. But could you say a little bit more about those groups? What are the requirements around those particular product types?
Yeah, so potentially some live bivalve mollusks, albeit live aquatic animals, if they're for direct consumption, they will be considered as products of animal origin, so they'll be subject to those measures. For the live bivalve molluscs, then if they are ready for human consumption, then they would also be considered as products of animal origin. So shellfish, like oysters, mussels, clams, cockles, as long as they're harvested from the right waters as well as another consideration, then they would fall under that particular category.
Thanks, Rob. Oysters, clams, and cockles. I think that's a Game of Thrones reference, but very good stuff. Couple of questions on IPAFFS. So Christina's asked, is it for import to GB only, not for export? And Janelle asks, is IPAFFS applying to goods transiting through Britain into Northern Ireland from Europe?
So the first question, then it's only going to be for declaring those imports into GB, and if those goods are transiting through into Northern Ireland, for example, then there will be a requirement there, but there's also going to be additional requirements for the destination itself, which could involve the traces system as well.
From memory, is there the movement assistance service or something like that for Northern Ireland?
So if there are additional certification requirements and costs incurred, then we do have the movement assistance scheme to help recover some of those costs where it's a GB to Northern Ireland movement. So yeah, it's worth having a look at to potentially recover some of those costs.
Perfect. Well, thank you everyone for those questions. Really good questions, and we've got a lot more to get through. So we'll close that poll now, share the results. So just over a half of you have registered to IPAFFS, a third of you haven't, and 13% not sure. So thank you everyone for that revealing response. But conscious of time, back to you, Rob.
Cool, thank you, Will. Moving on from the pre-notification then and the health certificates that should accompany the load, there is also something else that's going on in the background as well. And ultimately from July, we will see this realised with the introduction of the Common Health Entry document, or in fact, from the 20th of June. That information will be enhancing what we already provide on the IPAFFS notification. So this is a really important element to bring together all the interactions, the documentation, any potential inspections, all the data around the consignments. The CHED plays a very crucial role in the movements of these types of products. So it's an electronic record, Common Health Entry document. There are several versions depending on the nature of the goods. There's a different type. So it will be submitted to the Port Health authorities using IPAFFS, and a reference will be created, as I say, to be stated on the customs declaration, and it will be available from the 20th of June in readiness for the 1st of July, when those greater controls are in place. The person responsible for the load is going to be needing access to this when they're involved in presentation of the goods for a potential inspection, and not every consignment will need a physical inspection. There will be your remote documentary checks that take place once that notification is submitted, and it's at that point in most cases where an instruction will be provided to say a physical inspection will then be required when the goods actually arrive at the ports. But as I say, it's very important to get that across, that not every load is going to be subject to that physical check. But the CHED would record any outcome, any findings from that inspection, and any particular instructions as well about where those goods need to be going to ensure that it meets the conditions of the whole movement. This should then be retained by the importer for 3 years. Ultimately, once this document has been produced, there might be additional updates required by the importer just to ensure that it has met the obligations of the movement. For example, instructing the goods have been received at the destination that it should be arriving at. So I mentioned there are several versions of the CHED, so there's a very crucial difference between each one, be it a letter, an initial, but there we can see a couple of different types there. So one for live animals, the high risk food or feed, not of animal origin, products of animal origin, which are going to cover a lot of food products, and then CHED PPs for the plant products and propagating material. Now, those inspections, what actually happens, how does it come about, and what kind of checks take place. Let's have a quick look at this. So we have the SPS inspections that could take place. It's not going to be on every consignment, but there may be a physical inspection that's required on some, depending on the risk that's identified. So we've got a couple of locations that are in place. They have the right people and resource and who are qualified to inspect goods of a certain nature. And that's where those checks will be taking place. So the inspection centres, which are designated at either border control posts or control points, depending on the nature of the goods, these will be based either at the ports or close to the ports, perhaps at an inland border facility instead. This is quite an important point actually, is that for some plant products which are subject to potential inspections at the place of destination, from July that should also move back to the BCP or the CPs for those inspections as well. So it's not assumed that that will just happen instantly from July the 1st. It may be that continues, that practice, but obviously the officials who work with at DEFRA will be advising when that change will need to take place. So goods arriving in GB will need to enter via the established points of entry that have an appropriate designated BCP for that location. So they might not need to actually visit the BCP itself for an inspection. As I say, a separate instruction will be provided to you. Part of the pre-notification is about informing the BCP or the location for the inspections about the consignment in advance, so they'll be able to have that advance notice. And what will happen when the consignment is picked or identified as perhaps high risk and needs to be subject to those additional identity and physical checks and perhaps the documentation in there as well? A consignment inspection alert will be provided, and that should be visible either on the confirmation of the submission on IPAFFS on that screen or on the dashboard for the IPAFFS account as well. So when it gets to the BCPs then, the checks do vary, but you'll have an identity check. So it's a visual inspection of the consignment in order to verify the content and the labelling. Everything corresponds to what's been provided in the documentation. The documentary checks, very important to ensure that all the official certificates that have been provided, any attestations, they're with the consignment as they should be. And a physical check on the goods themselves, very much in accordance with the sanitary and phytosanitary measures as detailed in the health certificates themselves. So it could be including checks on the packaging, the means of transport as well, perhaps labelling, temperature sampling perhaps for further analysis and lab testing may also be required as well. So if we do have that, there is the potential for additional costs there as well. So if we are following the IPAFFS account dashboard, the confirmation screens, we can get that visibility of these inspections as soon as they're provided. So that way we've got that indication of those potential increased costs at these sites.
Thanks, Rob. And we're going to do one last poll before the final section. So we're just getting a sense now of how prepared you feel for the new SBS rules. We've had a couple of people write in asking about the rumours of the rules being delayed. Obviously, we've got, I think there's a report in the FT and the Independent, but the latest state of play is very much the 1st of July, as far as we're aware. I mean, Rob, have you heard anything to say otherwise, or is it just kind of watch this space? It's only in the media so far.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different things happening to ensure that everything is in place ready for the 1st of July. It's not just companies being prepared, receiving documents from their suppliers, but also the facilities themselves need to be ready. Some of the designations for certain BCPs are still pending and open, so that's going to be a crucial part of the readiness as well, but everything as I see is on track for the 1st of July.
And that actually leads on to a question from Ryan, who is asking, what is the opening date of the Dover SBS border control post, and what will its capacity be?
Okay, so the Dover SPS BCP, as it's described, is still waiting for its formal authorization for a designation of handling products of animal origin. So it's applied for this, as well as plant products, but that might be smaller mixed loads of plants, seeds and fresh produce as well, and also the high risk food and feed not of animal origin as well. So perhaps some ingredients that are generally found outside of Europe, and some of that plastic materials as well. They have a current designation for a few of those high-risk food items already, some items from Iran and Turkey. But it's open at the moment, it's pending, so we have to check some of the sources, like the bcpmap.co.uk is a very good source, but contacting the port health authorities that manage these locations is also a crucial part of understanding what's happening. Ultimately, they'll have that designation information, so establishing a dialogue with them would be very, very helpful.
Thanks, Rob, and I hope that's been helpful, Ryan. We'll do one more question at this stage of the webinar. Madeline is from a company who imports and exports salad. What is planned for companies who import multiple loads from fresh grown salad daily? Will our suppliers have to need to have multiple loads checked every day to be able to provide a phyto for each before departure? Sorry.
Okay, yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things to consider. I mean, on the export side from GB, there's a couple of schemes there, especially for products on the phytosanitary side. There are some simplifications there, which mean they're not going to be subject to an inspection every single time. So you can get access to those certificates much more easily. For inbound, in terms of consolidation, there are several groupage models that have been explored and are now being communicated to the industry to say this is what's available. If you have several loads that need to be collected at different locations, here's how you can operate on that basis. Very important because of the notification requirements and the transport details and vehicle details you need to disclose. You may not know the vehicle registration if there's different vehicles involved as well. So there is actually a useful Q&A session going on next week run by DEFRA on the groupage topic, so have a look out for that.
Thanks, Rob. I'll share the result of that poll, but it seems as though, as with anything in this area, just keeping an eye out for those updates from DEFRA seems really important for everyone to be mindful of. But looking at the poll results, so 56% quite prepared, 11% very prepared, and just about a third of you are either not very or not at all prepared. Really interesting. Again, thank you everyone for that poll, but again, conscious of time, so back to you, Rob, for the rest of the presentation.
Excellent, thank you, Will. And I think probably to follow the last question as well around updates and information, it leads us nice into this last section. So steps you're going to need to take just to ensure that you've got everything in place, you've got all your I's dotted and T's crossed. So what kind of things can we be doing? So here's a snapshot of what's happening at each step. So hopefully this kind of crystallizes what's happening and what will happen. So this is what we know is happening right now for those products, especially coming by roll-on, roll-off freight. We do have a particular logic to this process. We have a new system with GVMS. We've got to ensure that our IPAFFS notification is in place if we've got those consignments due to arrive. We've got to submit those notifications by 4 hours in advance of the arrival. That could change come July, so we've got to make sure again that we're speaking with the individual port health authority on potential derogations from the default legal requirement of 24 hours notification. So that's something especially to focus on. But this is what we would expect to see. But from July, we're going to have these additional requirements. So we're going to make sure that suppliers have access to model health certificates for the right product type. The checks that then could apply, so we've got to be looking out for that on IPAFFS. The instruction will come from there, so there'll be an alert created, and there will be an option to actually include multiple contact details so that all the parties that need to know about these additional interventions, if required, will be notified when they happen. So everyone who has a stake in this movement, they're going to receive that instruction. But those checks, if there are any that are carried out from July, then any notes or comments or observations, all of that will be captured by the CHED, and that's going to serve as the record of that particular movement. So this is a good one just to help kind of break down the different stages, who's doing what, which party is going to be responsible for each stage. Are you going to take control of the IPAFFS notification as an importer, or will you rely more on your intermediary to help you with that as well? What can we do then? What are we going to be able to check and to keep informed? As I said right at the start, there is quite an increase in the communication efforts by the authorities on these topics now. We need to be mapping out the movement. We need to know who all the parties are, the key stakeholders. We need to be making sure that suppliers are registered and ready to obtain health certificates, work with their partners on the certification and inspection of the EHCs or the phyto certificates. Are they actually approved to actually supply those products as well? So those are the types of background checks that can be done already. There are some exemptions, and these exemptions are a bit different to, or rather the criteria is a bit different to how they would affect exports to the EU, but definitely worth having a look, because there's a lot of products that could fall under the exemptions if they include both products of animal origin, but also plant-based main ingredients as well. There's going to be quite a lot of products that fall under scope of that. The contacts for the IPAFFS notification, so working out who needs to be informed. Ultimately, the driver is the one who needs to be informed so that they can move to those locations for those inspections and ensure that they're helping you meet your legal responsibilities as the importer. And I think really important to establish a dialogue with the authorities in the UK and health officials where you can, just to keep up to date as much as possible what's going on the ground. But you need to know your route. You need to know where the goods are going to be arriving, so you know which port health authority you're possibly going to be working with. Any information you give them up front now is going to help, I'm sure, with any potential interventions in the future. And having worked with some of these recently, they're more than happy to have conversations with you and get that insight into the types of products that are going to be arriving through those locations. And of course, we'll provide technical support as well at the IOE, including formal training as well, or public training that we offer around this topic. Okay.
Fantastic, thanks Rob. That was hopefully everyone's got what they needed to from our presentation. We do have a load of questions which will come through, so we'll do a few of those now. But the first one I'll do, which I'm going to group together a load of these because we've had a few people asking questions on a similar theme, which is asking questions like, is there a list of fruit and veg products which should be subject to conformity requirements? Questions around where do you get phytosanitary certificates, and yeah, where do you download them from? Lots of questions basically saying, where can you find the information? The first thing I'll say is that we are going to be sending out a expanded version of this slide pack with an appendix, which includes a fair few links, which will hopefully be helpful answering some of these questions. But Rob, is there anything you want to add in terms of signposting people to relevant sources?
Yeah, so for the phyto category, for fresh produce, plant products, the Plant Health Portal provided a list of products that fall under each category. So I mentioned there's regulated notifiable, where we need a phytocert and the IPAFFS notification, but there's those that are just regulated, and so they may not actually need the IPAFFS notification. So there is a list of those. You can find those there. They've got the various species and different types listed. So that's a good one, and we've included that on the slide pack as well. For the locations of the BCPs, I mentioned the bcpmap.co.uk website. It's been developed by the UK major port groups, so it's a very intuitive website. But you've also got the the Gov UK listings with the contact information for the Port Health authorities. So that's included because that's ultimately the people you need to be speaking with. If you've got any real concerns, specific questions about certain products, then it's worth opening up that dialogue. And I think crucially, I mentioned DEFRA a few times, you know, they've got a very big stake in this process working out. They've got the biosecurity of the UK to maintain here, but they're microsites that they've developed for exports and imports. But for imports, a lot of new information has been released in the last week or so. There's some individual product group fact sheets to look at, but also expanding on some of the points I mentioned today, like the alerts that IPAFFS will trigger for any inspections. There's some details on there. That was only, I think, released this week. And some further information on the CHEDs as well. So definitely have a look for that. I believe it's running off a like a Dropbox type website, but the links are there for that particular website as well.
Thanks, Rob, and thank you everyone for asking those questions. They are important to ask. Just on one of the points you were just making there, so we've had a couple of people ask about basically how the haulier might use IPAFFS. So Marie asks, will the haulier need access to IPAFFS to see if identity and physical checks are required? And then John asks, can you retain the CHED within the IPAFFS platform electronically, or does it need to be printed off and retained somewhere? So printing the IPAFFS notification and how the driver finds out what they need to do.
So, okay, so with the driver question then, so there's a bit of a kind of a logic to this, but you've got to ensure that ultimately the importer, who has that responsibility, the legal responsibility to ensure that someone turns up when they're instructed to, they'll take the lead from IPAFFS. That information will be communicated. It is intended that there will be an automatic notification to the party or to the haulier actually moving the goods. There will be a direct communication with them generated, so the importer doesn't need to do that kind of separately. But there is that option to include, I believe it's up to 5 contacts on the account, so that they'll all receive a notification to say there is an instruction here. So there's an additional obligation you've got to meet. Okay, and sorry, Will, the second question.
So I think it's around retaining the CHED within the IPAFFS platform electronically, or does it need to be printed?
Yeah, so there'll be an electronic record maintained in there, and that's what the officials will interact with when it comes to any inspections and advising on any additional requirements, delivery to certain places. The access will be there in electronic form. I think that ultimately, if you can hold an original copy, then you should do so. But I would advise taking the lead from the officials you deal with at the at DEFRA or the Port Health authorities, where you actually need to keep the original copies as well. It will be maintained in IPAFFS.
And a clarification from Thomas. So when you say the importer, is that the importer of record, or if the importer is not established in Britain?
So it's going to be the importer who's ultimately responsible for the receiving those goods and placing them onto the UK market. So it could quite likely be the same importer or record who is declared on the customs declaration, but they could be 2 different entities as well. When it comes to that notification, there are going to be lots of fields there to indicate whether the goods are actually being imported by one party and they're responsible for placing the goods on the UK market, and they're actually being delivered somewhere else. They might be going into a warehouse location or a distribution point. So you just got to make sure we're very clear on understanding who that is. I think in the last couple of days, there's been some clarification around legal responsibilities and liabilities. I probably wouldn't say anything more than that at this stage, but it could be different from the importer of record on the customs declaration.
Thanks, Rob. One last question, because we're coming up to time. We've had a few people asking around the transition from traces, and a few people asking about when to use peaches. So I was wondering if you could just give an overview of when and when those systems are being used and when they will stop being used for any particular imports.
So Traces is an EU system. It's also used for any movements into Northern Ireland as well from GB, where those health controls apply to animal and plant origin goods. Peach is a legacy system, and ultimately you will be instructed by DEFRA when you need to migrate from that to IPAFFS. Ultimately, IPAFFS will be the only system for those pre-notifications, but you have to take the lead from DEFRA on that. The transition is ongoing, and I know it's been done in phases, so when you're part of the next group to move over, you'll be informed by DEFRA.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, we have hit the witching hour. So thank you everyone for the questions, and thank you, Rob, for answering them and for the presentation too. We hope everyone has found that useful. And we've received, I think, it's hard to count because the questions come in very quickly, but at least kind of 60, 70 questions just over the last hour, 45 minutes or so. So thank you everyone for those questions. But as you can see on the last slide, here is some of the support that the IOE and IT provides to traders, including training and consultancy, our lunchtime learning webinars, and much, much more. This includes a new one-day training course dedicated entirely to sanitary and phytosanitary controls. So if you need more information in this area, you can book a whole day with Rob's dulcet tones, and you can do that on export.org.uk. Just a final reminder, we will be sending all registrants a recording of today's webinar, along with an expanded copy of the slides, including that appendix of useful links. That'll be with you at least by the end of the week, working week. Please do get in touch if for any reason that email doesn't come through to your main inbox. But as you leave, please do let us know what you thought of today's webinar and any suggestions for topics on future webinars by completing the exit survey. But for now, thank you for joining us today, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thanks, everyone. Bye.